Memory transcription subject, Captain Sovlin, United Nations Fleet Command. Date, Standardized Human Time, December 3, 2136. The Shadow Fleet disengaged from any direct confrontation with the Arxer. After protecting the warpers, aggression was not suitable to our survival. Padding the distance between us and the enemy was our first priority. Lighter Terran ships acted as a buffer, and drew the Greys' attention with hit-and-run tactics. A gradual retreat occurred without substantive strikes from the arboreal predators. From the fleet-wide chatter, it sounded like the UN planned to sink their heels in for days. I didn't understand how prolonging this conflict's duration helped our cause. How long could any sapient maintain combat readiness for? Perhaps the humans were willing to drop dead of exhaustion if the Greys bit the bullet too. There's also the question of our warp fleet, and if they're coming back. Humans don't desert out of cowardice, do they? I trusted that the Terrans had a plan at work, and that military flightiness was uncommon on Earth. There had never been a chance of holding Silas, which was presently encircled by Arxer ships. This was about proving that humanity wouldn't go down with a whimper. The Greys would have to claw for every nanoparsec. Tyler clapped his Yodel pal on the shoulder. Get us a quick visual on this asteroid. Shift back in the Greys' direction afterward. A space rock was making a pass close to Silas, in astronomical terms, concurrent with the battle. The United Nations selected it as our cover to hunker down. This oblong body was conducive to defensive positioning, and it prevented the Arxer from targeting us at a distance. The Greys were still following us into the great beyond, unwilling to let us escape. We needed a chance to outfox them. To ensure our fortress held, we also deployed short-range FTL disruptors. The last thing humanity needed was for the enemy to warp in on our haunches, and mow us down without warning. Curiously, the Arxer hadn't enacted a similar barrier to stop our vessels from trying the same thing. Dominion ships might not possess anti-FTL capabilities, since no foe had the gumption to drop atop them before. Arxer craft had fanned out around the asteroid, attempting to swallow it whole. I got a brief glimpse of the crater-pocked surface, as Onso focused the viewport. Captain Monahan positioned us with a sight line around the asteroid, while keeping the ship frame nestled in its shadow. The Terran fleet unleashed a slew of kinetics alongside us. There was no rest for the weary during this fray. I cleared my throat. It appears that several Greys have got their shields back up and running. We could use another round of shield breakers, sir. Already on it. Thankfully, our gunship stocked more than we expected to use, Tyler replied. Okay, but why the fuck are the Greys tailing us away from the target? Carlo's head snapped up from his transmission feed, and skepticism flashed in his eyes. Isn't their objective to take Silas? I think their objective is to teach us a lesson. Humans are a target because of Silas, but it's hardly about the territory anymore. I flexed my claws. That's a good thing. The Arxer should force us to make the first move. Instead, they waltz right into our gunfire. My eyes darted back to the sensor screen. Per the captain's directive, I highlighted the specific ships taking the widest vectors to flank us. Those contacts would have optimal shot angles, and needed to be dispatched swiftly. Repelling the Arxer's encroachment was going to be an arduous affair. Electromagnetic missiles were ejected by the UN gunships, slotting into the enemy ranks. Unfortunately, we knew now that these wouldn't cook their shielding mechanisms forever. Our weapon station took the down defenses as a cue. Humans could crank out kinetics in a hurry. I hoped I'd selected the correct targets to give us an edge. Perfectly timed bullets drowned one Arxer bomber, which was strafing aggressively to the near flank. Predator technicians swiveled our main turret to a new target without hesitation. The focus in a human's eye still chilled me, since it revealed how singular their fixation on death could be. I wondered if such a dark ability was dormant within the Gojid genome, waiting to be awakened. Sovlin. You've gone very quiet. Don't zone out on me again. Tyler snapped. Samantha crossed her arms. Oh, I bet he's having one of his woe-is-me moments. I'm going to claw your tongue out. I shot her a grouchy glare, before refocusing on my data. Nothing to report, sir. But my eyes are peeled. The Terran fleet had room to maneuver behind the asteroid's berth, whenever the Greys got too close for comfort. Our reverse thrusters kicked into gear, steering us away from overzealous attackers. There was a fine line between defending ourselves and getting overrun. This wasn't a mission of lofty ideals, like most I'd undertaken with the Predators. This was about survival, and sticking around. The Arxer can afford a couple dozen losses, if it means pinning our fleet down. Looks like they managed to land a few hits against us already. The Dominion was applying pressure from all angles. A new wave of enemies crested over the asteroid's peak, utilizing the third dimension. Plasma fire buffeted down on us, and the UN hastily matched the Greys' heading. My screen warned me of several target locks, which left our vessel in a precarious position. We were climbing right into the firing line, where the Arxer wanted us. Change course now. We need evasive maneuvers. I bellowed. Monahan bared her teeth. Drop our speed as quickly as possible, then gun it the way we came. Navigations brought us to a stall, ratcheting down from the steep climb. Power was diverted to slowing us down, and a bit of resistance slipped through the inertial dampeners. Our nose dipped back in the direction we came from, and I got a good look at our Terran allies. Several friendlies were retreating from the asteroid altogether, ditching any confrontation. Onso spun the viewport toward the space below, allowing us to plot a safe course. An Arxer vessel blasted plasma toward us, right as we kicked the ship into overdrive. Navigation sent us into a barrel roll, and it was unclear if erratic movements would be enough. The energy beam sizzled past our former location, whiskers away from singeing our tail. That was a bit too close for comfort. Even the human crew realized the severity of this fight. Arxer were closing in on us from 3 directions, and their numbers overwhelmed our limited forces. The asteroid wasn't large enough for us to spread out and mitigate fire. Not even fellow Predators could avoid getting cornered by a conquest fleet. Monahan frowned. The UN just ordered a retreat. We're moving further away from Silas, as quickly as possible. Time to find somewhere else to squat. What? Onso hissed. We're falling back again. We might as well flee the system. Knock it off. Tyler nudged the yodel with an elbow, chastising his impudence. If the captain tells you to fly the ship into a red dwarf, you fucking do it. This is dishonorable. If a yodel herd was this outgunned, we'd concede the territory. I shot him a smoldering stare. And pray, what happens when you concede the territory? What do the Arxer know of honor? Nobody in this galaxy is honorable, including your benevolent Federation. I thought humans had pride. We didn't defend Silas, and we're not defending ourselves now. Some of us trust the Predator's plan, Uplift. We're taking as many Greys with us as possible. Suck it up. Tyler curled his fist. Enough. Mind your stations and focus, before we all get pulverized. The Terran fleet had split up on several vectors, and forced the enemy to divide their pursuit as well. It was strange to see humans limping off like prey, licking their wounds. Our ship count was bleeding off dozens, as the Arxer got free potshots at our tails. Nearby UN vessels were picked off on the viewport, leaving debris in our vicinity. The falling comrades encouraged our warship to pick up the pace. It was the stragglers that were most vulnerable. With caution thrown to the wind, we sped off well beyond the recommended velocity. Despite how our reserves were running thin, the humans dished out a generous serving of missiles. Forcing the Arxer to intercept explosives distracted them from slaughtering us, though any damage sustained was surface level. I didn't care if I lived or I died, but there were others on this ship who retained meaning in their lives. Perhaps I'd been too harsh on Onso, who had a point about fleeing the system. This beatdown was a disappointing result for the Terrans, and I failed to see any grand scheme coming together. It could be human pride, refusing to admit defeat. I would sacrifice myself to kill a few Greys, but what about Sam and Carlos? It might be time to cut our losses, instead of seeing innocent humans suffer. Plasma beams sizzled around us by the hundred. It didn't appear that humanity was putting up much of a fight. We were running for our lives. Should we escape the current chase, inviting another round was tantamount to suicide. Command's idea of stretching this out for days was a bizarre fantasy. Hell, we'd be lucky to take out a tenth of the Arxer fleet. A powerful jolt shook the ship, as a beam connected with our rear quarters. My teeth rattled against my jawbone, and I felt my brain lurch against my skull. Many human crew on their feet stumbled or hit the deck. Checking my data feed, I saw that enough energy had seeped through the shields. There was a tear in our hull plating. Thankfully, key systems were unharmed, but the affected compartment would need to be sealed off. Tyler narrowed his eyes. Sovlin, report. Hull integrity is intact, sir. Damage is non-critical, but I suggest lowering our pace pronto. Our power needs to be invested in shields. I pleaded. No can do. The quicker we get out of Dodge, the better. With all due respect, we were lucky to survive that hit. The Arxer will want to finish us off now. Your concern is noted. What's the status of the human fleet overall? We've lost about 200 ships in this push. Combine that with the losses we took out of the gate, and the warpers, we're barely fielding 400 ships. Not to mention, our forces split up now. Any good news? Come on, man. I hope the enemy has a bloodied nose too. And the Arxer ship count, the ones fighting us, anyways, is still hovering above 2,000. Candidly, warping our ships out was stupid. It made the odds even worse. So we're just fucked, Onso growled. We sent away fighting resources, and we're fucked. Carlos forced a tepid smile. It's not over. Humans have come back from worse. I diverted my attention from the bleak odds, and studied the predators one final time. To think that in my first encounter with them, I had thought them brutal deceivers that enslaved the Venlil. My words to Zarn, that humans must be irredeemable, couldn't have been further from the truth. The prey aliens working alongside violent hunters was the good news Tyler asked for. How could I explain that bonding and empathy were the positives? With Arxer munitions blitzing out around us, all I thought was how glad I was that humanity were in the picture. One battle loss wouldn't define our future, this was just a setback in the Predator's scheme. My eyes drifted to the viewport, and watched the Greys speeding after us. Out of my periphery, I saw inbound subspace trails flash on my sensor screen. Terran ships blinked into existence a split second later, and nipped at the Arxer's right flank. They'd emerged from subspace without warning, the short jump left little time for detection. Munitions battered the enemy's exposed side, hitting them from a perpendicular angle. The crazed humans had emerged from FTL already firing. Ambush the ambushers, I muttered appreciatively. But there's not very many of them. Only 12 circled back. Looking closer at my screen, I reminded myself that the UN fleet had split up. The Arxer were forced to separate their numbers to follow each group, and that increased susceptibility to ambushes. More Terran vessels assisted other posses, simultaneous to our own rescue. That still didn't account for the 300 ships that abandoned us. I counted less than a third of that tally in this jump. The Arxer ships swiveled around to face the surprise attackers, and focused on mowing them down with prejudice. The distraction allowed us to make a getaway, but Captain Monahan was ordering navigations to reverse course. The humans saw this as an opportunity to strike back, and our shadow fleet began advancing on the larger enemy. Captain Monahan clasped her hands behind her back. "Find me some soft targets. The distracted ones, the clueless ones, the damaged ones, whatever works." I flicked my claws in acknowledgement, and leaned toward the viewport with focus. The Dominion had regained their bearings, with our small ambush no longer posing a threat. The filthy beasts decided that our manpower was inadequate, and I was inclined to agree with their assessment. However, just as the enemy turned to mop up the assailants, the humans pounced again. A new wave emerged without any heads-up, this time surfacing on the rear flank. The primates weren't holding anything back, unloading every munition type at their disposal. Opening another angle of attack caused disruption on two sides, and the Arxer's organization suffered a rare lapse. Each Terran ambusher was scoring multiple casualties, while instilling widespread confusion. The Shadow Fleet found new life, as we charged in to help our allies. I highlighted a heavily damaged enemy for weapons to sweep up, growling with satisfaction. The numbers were still slanted against us, but the atmosphere on the bridge had shifted drastically. Our tiny band was making the enemy fall over themselves to shoot us. Furthermore, the psychological advantage of paranoia couldn't be understated. It was like walking through a predator-infested forest as a Gojid, and expecting a fanged beast to pop out of every bush. The Arxer had no clue whether there would be a third or a fourth attack. Warpers could come from any direction, including above or below. The galaxy's apex predators were left chasing ghosts. "All of the Greys are on their heels, sir. I say we just hit whoever's easiest to line up," I chuckled. Tyler dipped his head, before informing weapons to fire freely. I confirmed with my sensor's readout that 100 warpers still hadn't returned. There had to be one more ambush coming. My prediction was that it would come from above, since Terrans hadn't utilized the third dimension yet. Any unoccupied Arxer were keeping wary guns trained at the sky, rather than at our battered fleet. It seemed that the monsters shared my speculation. But humans weren't prone to predictability, as evidenced by the ship's actual appearance. Their warp point was either predator derangement or instinctual brilliancy. My jaw almost hit the floor. Sleek silver bodies were birthed from the void, and their play wasn't to swoop in on any sensible heading. The psychotic primates warped out right in the middle of the Arxer fleet. Those vessels are surrounded by enemies, with no possible escape. They have no time to orient themselves either. It's a miracle if they don't crash. The last Terran warpers spread themselves out amid Arxer ranks, and took no time to collect themselves. Ruthless in victory's pursuit, these primates emptied their missile bays upon re-entry. The Greys were adept at intercepting projectiles, but this was an unexpected barrage at point-blank range. From where only friendly ships had been, humans were ramming missiles down their throats. The Arxer had stopped coordinating with their comrades, and hurled blind fire at the infiltrators instead. That tactic did connect with some Terran interlopers, but friendly fire was a more common outcome. The weapons station prepared our own explosives with renewed vigor. We knew the Greys were preoccupied, so this was our best chance of dodging their defenses. Captain Monahan snarled at the viewport. "Give it everything we've got. We need to finish them." The Greys' ship count had been sliced in half since the ambush commenced. The Shadow Fleet was dishing out considerable damage, with alternating plasma and kinetics. The warpers padded our numbers, and sailed with a recklessness that was unmistakably human. No other species could wreak such havoc with so few assets. It was akin to a blood frenzy, with humans chucking armor-piercing shells to increase their kills. The Arxer had no shields to resist the onslaught, and their numbers were evening out with ours. These Greys were in a desperate retreat. It had taken a heavy toll to stave off our ambush. Granted, there were more enemies camped at Silas, but this fight was becoming level. Our plasma railgun got off a few volleys, and complemented our diverse explosives. The ambush had been swift and decisive. The Arxer were torn apart from their heart. A few hundred enemies hobbled off in shell shock, and sought protection from Silas raiders. The impossible speed at which this turnaround transpired had my head spinning. What sane race would trap themselves with their enemies? The results were undeniable, but no prey military could replicate human efficacy. It was astounding how Terrans conjured up novel tactics with ease, showing off unparalleled cunning. I couldn't reconcile the caring species I knew with the deviousness they honed in battle. Onso gawked at the viewport. I misspoke. Humans are standing up for themselves, quite well. That's who we are. We're the ones who run out of bullets and fixed bayonets, Carlos rumbled. We don't go down without a fight. I chewed at my claws. You would never surrender. I didn't say that. I said not without resisting, and not to a merciless enemy. Certainly not to them. The Greys don't put their prisoners in luxury spas, Samantha quipped. Predator or not, I wouldn't want to be their plaything. The Terran fleet mulled around our current location. Pursuit of the Arxer wasn't an objective. Considerable enemies were amassed by Silas, with an initial tally of 6,000 strong. The UN defensive line was a mere quarter of that, so it was unclear how the Earthlings could terminate the siege. It wouldn't be possible to pull warp tricks within the FTL disruption boundary, either. This engagement proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the UN was not weak. The Arxer would respect the Primates' forces in the future. But the Terrans had to decide whether it was worth it to liberate Silas. Our position was ripe with disadvantages, and we might not have much energy left in the tank. If humans truly didn't go down without a fight, perhaps it was time to fix bayonets. We'd need a lot more cunning and spite in a hurry. Memory transcription subject, Chief Hunter Isif, Arxer Dominion Sector Fleet. Date, Standardized Human Time, December 4, 2136. Once the Terrans realized I was awake, intelligence officers interrogated me from outside my cell. I spilled more than I should have perhaps, given how little Zhao cared for saving the Arxer. Cooperation with the humans was the only way to prove I was on their side. It was foolish to assume that their government could discern my intentions, after chaos ravaged their power structures. But I couldn't stop thinking of Elias Meyer, and his devotion to a better future. There had to be other humans out there who understood me. I just needed to discover a way to reach them. One of mankind's most interesting aspects was their branching opinions. Someone had to understand that the reasoning, dictating that I was an enemy, was flawed. My actions should speak my intentions. If the Zeruleans explained their story, it would at least prove that I was not planning on eating them. My acute hearing dialed in on footsteps down the hall, and I put on a collected exterior. It was a shame anger had gotten the better of me. I shouldn't have threatened the Secretary General, no matter how heated our dialogue was. That certainly didn't prove that I was a peaceable guy. The Terran interrogators had taken those threats seriously, and kept outside of the cell. After all, they couldn't muzzle me if they wanted me to talk, right? The humans knew that I could kill them with a single bite. I wished I could prove that I was a predator of their caliber, not an animal like the prey believed. This newcomer approaching my cell would peer through the window like all the rest. I was a museum exhibit as much as a prisoner. Hello? I raised my voice, hoping this human could hear me. I am not your enemy. How do I prove that? My cell door clanged open, and an American general wearing camouflage strode in. The dust-colored hair suggested this was General Jones. She seemed unconcerned by my presence. There were no restraints to keep me from lunging at her, or overpowering her. Interest sparked in my brain, as she turned her back to me. The lack of fear was a stark difference from my earlier visitors. The primate moved a chair up beneath a camera, and hopped atop the support. Jones switched the recording device off, her flimsy fingers finding the buttons with ease. Why did she not want this interaction on tape? Her demeanor didn't suggest that she intended to torture me. That would be inadvisable in my unfettered state. Confidence shone in Joan's green eyes, as she seated herself right across from me. I kept my maw closed tightly, and listened for her eventual declaration. The human leaned forward, lowering her voice to a hushed whisper. "Isif, I tried to get you to leave. I didn't want to bring you in like this," Joan said. My nostrils flared. "What? You knew this would happen?" "You and Zhao both acted exactly as I predicted. You have a lot in common, but I digress. I don't have much time, so I'm going to make this quick." "Good. I'm listening. I wanted to establish contact with you for a while, but you must not talk to Earth so directly in the future. You are going to get yourself killed. Honestly, it's a good thing that we can have a proper conversation in here." I studied the human with narrowed eyes. This was quite different from her hostility on the call, when she rebuked me at every turn. Joan spoke as though she was already aware that I was an asset. It made no sense why she'd allowed my capture, if that were true. Nonetheless, this message returned a glimmer of hope. "Killed? No, human, I'm good at what I do. I've managed not to wind up dead for decades," I growled. Jones flashed her teeth. "Oh, Isif, we both know you're not subtle. You have a conversation with Shaza, and then immediately go to Earth? How would you explain that if an Arxer followed your trail?" "I would say I threatened you at length to turn over Silas. For all you know, Shaza bugged your ship. You're her rival, and she might suspect your motives already. She tells Gizmo you're lying, and bam, you're dead." "I see your point. Shit, I'm glad you didn't say anything self-incriminating on our Hale. I was trying to stop you from spilling the beans. For your sake, Isif, I will suggest ways to contact us on the down low, going forward." The Terran general extended her hand, and dropped a tooth extension on the table. Jones pointed to her weak canines, then at my snout. I considered what she was asking for a moment, before popping the crown onto my chipped tooth. The Dominion considered it weakness to fix fangs, since those marks were hunting souvenirs. However, I could worry about that aspect at another time. Jones leaned back in her seat. "There's a hard drive inside that crown. Dead drop locations and codes, as well as a full lesson on spycraft. So then, you know I'm an asset. Was all this really necessary?" I huffed. "I'm afraid so. The amount of folks on Earth who know you're a human sympathizer. I can count them on two hands, and they're all part of Five Eyes. It's better that way. I do not know what you're referring to. But if I understand, the Secretary General doesn't know about me? You don't trust Zhao?" "It's not so simple. Zhao would want to keep records of your role, accessible to a lot more eyes, and he would demand that we keep tabs on you. He might risk your welfare for short-term gain, or even blackmail you into going further than you are willing. Whereas I see your full value." I narrowed my eyes to slits. I'm not some Venmal that can be pushed around. I'd like to see him try to blackmail me. Besides, would it be such a bad thing to have my allegiance documented? The less people who know your true loyalties, the better. We don't know how many breaches occurred while Arxer roamed Earth, or whether the Dominion can access our databases. I'm protecting you from our insufficiency, because I know we can't safeguard you yet. And this is why Meyer did not speak of me? Well, I can't exactly ask him that, Isif. But Meyer was always a big-picture guy, and I'd wager he clued at least one person in. Someone he trusted. I lashed my tail against the floor, taking a moment to process her words. If Secretary General Zhao was oblivious to my actual agenda, that meant he was serious about locking me up forever. That also meant his aggravating behavior wasn't a performance. He believed I was a Zerolian-eating fiend that plotted against Earth. How did General Jones plan to secure my release? Of the billions of humans in existence, fewer than 10 were briefed on my identity. I wasn't sure how to feel about the cybersecurity concerns, or the assumptions on how Zhao would extort me. She also implied that I wasn't supposed to convince the United Nations of my fealty at all. I feel like I'm owed an apology in all of this. I've gone out of my way to help humans, and as an Arxer, I despise insults. Listen, I'm sure Zhao's words don't sit right with you. It's not really his fault, Jones continued. A U.S. cyber division cracked Arxer communications this week. That transcript? My people wiped anything that would give you away to the larger intelligence community. A growl rumbled in my throat. Nice going. So I guess it's totally okay that he had me tranquilized like a monster. Zhao is paranoid about further attacks on Earth. His home nation represented 20% of the total death tally. His famous speech's tagline was "Not one more," referring to civilian casualties, and I can't say I disagree. He's willing to protect our home at all costs, and that includes against Arxer plots. Whatever, human. You said we have little time, so I'll save my scathing remarks for another date. I presume the transcript is how you found out I'm on your side. Isif, please, you continually underestimate us. We've been monitoring you since you set foot in New York. Every conversation, behavior, and holopad search was surveilled. I see. We've got your back, buddy. It's up to you what you want to do next. If you're doing this for a better tomorrow, great. If you just want glory in our adoration, don't bother. Nobody will know your name or what you've done, not as a spy. I am not here for pride. I just want the centuries of death to be stopped. But how long must I slink around for? That is also up to you. If you pull rank and use food as a motivator, I imagine your fleet would follow you in rebellion. General Jones met my gaze with a knowing smirk. You could offer refuge to those targeted by Betterment too. Don't play coy. Could I count on human support? I prodded. Only superficially. We don't want war with the entire Dominion if it's avoidable. We'd prefer to keep the fight against a single warlord. Right. The choice to start an open rebellion is irreversible, so I'm giving you options. You don't have to stick your neck out. I contemplated her words in silence, knowing full well the risks of insurrection. As cowardly as Terran espionage sounded, my own verdict was that Arxer revolutionaries weren't ready. Preparation for an uprising would increase our odds, and humanity might become amenable to our cause. I couldn't fault Earth's non-interference, when I'd muse myself that a two-front war would be a steep task. The humans are new to the galaxy, and they're assaulting the Federation already. It's better to bide our time, at least a little. I slammed my paw on the table. We'll do it your way. Now get me out of here, Jones. You're gonna bust me out, right? The American general had the gall to laugh. No, God, no. I'm not going to openly oppose Zhao. Someone else is going to order your release. Don't worry, she's already landed. Who? Aaron Kemper from Alien Affairs? Sarah Rosario, Odyssey officer? I might have suggested that Governor Tarva come to facilitate the Zerulean rescue's return. She'll want to see the Arxer we captured. Tarva. Fucking Tarva? That's your plan? Yes. I thought you two were on good terms. Tarva is a Venlil, for fuck's sake. I roared. I do like her. But the second a human says it was all a ruse, just Arxer deceit for long-term suffering, she'll be happy to believe it. General Jones smiled. For someone who supposedly is open-minded, you think quite lowly of the Venlil. Try having a little faith. Faith? Faith? Are you fucking insane? Tarva will never believe me. I wouldn't even hold it against her. Ah, and they're coming. Guess that means our time is up. Good luck. I curled my lip at the human, before turning my head dismissively. Jones scrambled to put the camera back on, and hurried out of the room. I hoped the primate had another plan, when the Tarva maneuver blew up in her face. It was disheartening to think the progress I'd made with the Venlo leader would be undone, for the sake of my cover. Claws clicked across the floor, tailed by the shuffles of dress shoes. Renewed anger surged through my veins, as I detected Zhao's gravelly cadence. But I couldn't hold a grudge against the Secretary General if he had an incomplete set of facts. This wasn't any time to get emotional. I inhaled deeply, and relaxed my facial muscles to look calm. Given that I did respect Governor Tarva, it was worth an honest effort at convincing her. At least I could say I tried to win her over, and that I kept a level head throughout our encounter. Perhaps one day I'd point to that fact to repair our relations. Hurtful accusations were bound to fly from the Venlo leader. I steeled myself for the insults that were looming. Only a defective Arxer would feel anything at betrayal, since we weren't supposed to care what others thought of us. It was foolish of me to have any emotions toward a prey animal, knowing that she saw me as a tool. Tarva played at diplomacy because she wanted her planet to be left alone. Believe an Arxer would have the bravado to fly at Earth. The Venlo's squeaky voice hit my ears, carrying far due to its pitch. Those Xerolians are lucky you were able to rescue them. Zhao's footsteps came closer. This guy is very high up the ladder too. We got him before he could turn on humans. He was boasting about using us. Right in that cell there. I rose to my paws, watching as the Venlo moved up to the window pane. Fear was visible in her side-facing eyes, despite the barrier between us. Her pupils managed to lock on me, and shock trickled through her expression. That erased any doubt that Tarva could recognize me, rather than assuming all Arxer looked the same. See Chief Hunter Isif? To my amazement, the Venlo whirled around with an assertive posture. Why the fuck would you arrest Isif? I just told you. He's manipulating us into fighting the Arxer's battles, then planning to subjugate us all once it's done, Zhao answered. It's what he says behind closed doors. We couldn't let him spy on Earth. Tarva swiveled back to the glass. Isif, is any of that true? You really speak like that, to the other Greys? And you had those sickly Xerolians on your ship? This is hopeless. There's no way she'll believe me. Yes, to both, I sighed. But I was trying to stop Shaza from attacking the humans, without being killed for treason. I rescued those Xerolians from her farm at great personal risk. Not that you care, I added silently. It took a colossal effort to force a stoic expression. The Venlo backed away from the window, and I resigned myself to her fleeing in disgust. Governor Tarva was open-minded for speaking with me at all. Few in the Republic would support her hearing my side of the story. I appreciated that gesture as a sign of respect. The door clicked open without warning, and an alarmed Secretary General rushed after Tarva. The Venlo had unlocked my cell from the outside. To my amazement, she seemed to be letting me out. My maw dropped with shock. Why would a prey ruler trust the word of an Arxer? The governor flicked her ears. Let Isif go, right now. Whatever favors I am owed by humanity, I'm calling them in. What are you doing? Zhao tugged the Venlo back, and hastily shut the door. You can't possibly believe that story. What he said to Shaza was theatrics so he wouldn't get executed. Isif wants an end to the war and to cattle farming. Meyer told me that much, and yes, I trust him with my life. Elias Meyer didn't forsake me. Jones was right, and Prophet, maybe she guessed who he told from the start. Secretary General Zhao gaped at Tarva. Have you considered that Elias was confused, or deceived himself? Not at all. Meyer's dying wish was for me to make peace with the Arxer, she responded. As he bled out in my arms, that was what he asked. He was a good man. I'm sorry for your loss. But you cannot trust the Greys, you know that. We ran empathy tests on every Arxer we captured at the cradle, and not a one passed. ISIF is different. You have no evidence to support that. The science says the Arxer are a sociopathic race. You know how many human volunteers failed the empathy test? 0. Individual results can vary. You have your people with predator disease. But it would be different if every soldier was a sociopath. I don't think this is a test a high-ranking Dominion officer can pass. But ISIF will pass, Zhao. What does it hurt to humor me? Give him the test, and if he passes, you'll let him go with me. There was a long silence, as the human stared down the prey leader. The Secretary-General offered a reluctant nod at last, and called for guards to transport me to the lab. Despite Zhao's stubbornness, he seemed unwilling to alienate the Venmo. I was shocked that Tarva had fought for me, and I couldn't fathom how to express my gratitude. Politeness wasn't a field I had any practice in. I decided to comply with the human escort, embracing the conditions of my release. It was ironic that my defectiveness would bolster my standing with the United Nations. Perhaps General Jones would peek at the results too, to ensure I hadn't pulled a long con on her. The empathy test was the least of my concerns. Instead, I was worried how the Terrans fared against Shaza. The pack predators had wormed their way back into my thoughts again. I wanted to ensure their continued survival, now more than ever. Knowing that Meyer's final request was about the Arxer's future renewed my trust in his kind. Humanity was interested in reforming our society, and I could guide them to an age of prosperity,